You ready?
Yeah.
Have you ever felt taken for granted or get anxious when someone asks for what you'd consider to be too much? Do you find yourself agreeing to things that are not necessarily in your best interest? Well, then you need some proper boundaries, and we're going to talk about that and more right now. Hi, you're listening to The Fight Coach, The Psychotherapist and The Gym Momma. FCPGM is a weekly podcast where we discuss important topics that affect you and your family and tips that we suggest that might just help you out. On today's episode, we're building healthy relationship dynamics by laying out ground rules that guarantee your own long-term mental health. I'm joined, of course, by James White of API Clinics, a psychotherapist well-versed in the world of mental health, stress management and anxiety.
How's it going?
Marlene Griffin, aka The Gym Momma, a parent of 3 and an owner-manager of a busy martial arts and fitness gym.
Hi there.
My name is Liam O'Griffin. I'm a professional MMA coach and an e-learning developer with an engineering background. If you'd like to follow along with us using our show notes, you can get them at www.fcpgm.com. There you'll find links to our Facebook community page, our Twitter feed and our Discord server. If you'd like to join the conversation and add your experience and feedback, we'd love to hear from you. So, let's begin. Alright, so take 2. I messed up the last recording, so we're on take 2 at the moment. I've got a lot of buttons to be pushing this week, and I'm not really kind of sure what I'm doing yet. But anyway, start away there.
So, definitions.
Yeah, so we're starting today's kind of thing is about boundaries, and we're going to start with the definition of what a boundary is.
So, when I was doing research for the episode, and you type into the dictionary what is the definition of boundary or boundaries, it comes up with boundaries are a line which marks the limits of an area or a dividing line. And I suppose it is sort of relative to what we're going to be talking about, because we're probably talking about more personal boundaries and stuff. So when you look up the definition of personal boundaries, it comes up with personal boundaries are guidelines, rules or limits that a person creates to identify reasonable and safe and permissible ways for other people to behave towards themselves and how they will respond when someone passes those limits. So effectively, what's okay for other people to do or say to you, and how you're going to respond to whatever that is. In a negative or positive way, depending on what it is, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose it's nice when you define it, because like boundaries are really, really important, because everybody likes boundaries, even when you talk about kids. You know, you give kids, they like rules, they like boundaries, and that's how they actually grow and are safe in the world, because there's boundaries. I was listening to one TED talk, and the doctor was talking about that 2-year-olds are great at boundaries. They'll tell you no, and you call it the terrible twos, but actually it's them setting their boundaries. Not going to do it, and there's nothing you can do about it.
I don't know what the degree that everybody likes them.
Well,
some people don't like the boundaries when you set them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think that it's nice to have it clear. You know where you stand, and know, like, okay, if I do a certain thing that's going to piss somebody off, or it's not going to be okay, that and obviously, if you don't like that rule, then you have consequences if you don't adhere to it. But at least it's nice to know where that boundary is. When as kids, you kind of push buttons and see how far you get. When you're,
I think everybody can sort of push boundaries now and again, But like when we were looking at the types of them, when I was doing research, and it came up with a multitude of stuff. So they talked about, say, material boundaries. So, if you want to borrow my lawnmower or something like that, do you know what I mean? Or you want to buy money or clothes or my car or whatever, do you know what I mean? Then they talked about physical boundaries, so that's in regards to personal space, privacy, your body and stuff like that. Whether you're going to allow somebody to give you a hug or not give you a hug, which is obviously in this moment in time very, very few hugs going around. Then you have the mental boundaries, so then we're talking about, say, where somebody is maybe verbally or mentally abusive to you in some way, shape or form. And then you have emotional boundaries, which is about how, people make you feel internally. Sexual boundaries, so what's the right to say no and protect your comfort level and whatever that may be. And then you have spiritual boundaries, so that's regards to, say, your beliefs and how other people may try to change them or force their beliefs on you. Do you know what I mean?
Or joke about them, make fun of your religious, maybe.
Yeah.
That would be passing boundaries if you were making fun of somebody who was obviously didn't like it.
Yeah.
I tell you a funny story actually about kind of boundaries when you mentioned there, about the lawnmower. I remember it's kind of a story, but it's not really boundaries. But I just thought it was funny because you mentioned the lawnmower. That when Nicole was young, and then Jessica was coming on the scene. I remember reading this book, and it was kind of a case of my goodness, when you're talking to kids, how you tell them everything's going to be grand and sharing is caring, and and actually, what was kind of funny was that we need our kids to say what they're okay with sharing. That's their boundary. And they were talking about, we say if you had somebody come to their house and you make them share all their toys and they don't want to, it's like somebody coming into your house and saying, actually, I'm just going to borrow the microwave there. She don't mind, sharing is caring. You're kind of going, no, that's not all right. Where that's the boundary then, where kids are supposed to be able to say, look, okay, I like these toys, I'll share those ones, but I don't want to share those ones. And that was, and that was kind of, them able to set their boundaries. And we kind of don't really take that into consideration. So it kind of came up for me with this. But the other thing it was about, when this went on, the same article went on about the second baby coming into the house, and and everyone saying to the kid, oh, look, you're going to have somebody to play with, and you're going to have loads of people to more to love, and all of this. And they were kind of saying, put yourself in a child's place, and you would say your partner comes into you and kind of said, you know what, I love you so much that I've decided to get a second of one of you. And she's going to cook with you. She's going to clean the house with you when I'm not there. It's just going to be lovely.
I don't see the problem. What's the problem?
And then this child, you're telling your child. All right, so we put it the other way. And then maybe... okay, we'll have a second man in the house.
I don't find that wrong with that either. With all the stuff I'm asked to do, I think it's a good idea.
But it was just funny. Nothing really to do with that, other than the first part of it. But I thought the second part had to be thrown in there for a bit of fun.
So, when we're talking about boundaries, people can find it really, really difficult, and there's many, many different reasons why people have a problem setting boundaries, and some of it is to do what you said, which is, how we're brought up, the expectation that was put on us by our guardians or whoever's brought us up, or society, and the implications of what society deems okay and not okay. And there is in an element of, when you talk about the child's toys, is I would hope as parents you try and bring your child up that they're not selfish in a negative way.
Yeah.
But they have to be selfish in a beneficial way for themselves at times too, which is a negative. Do you know what I mean?
It's like the old proverb, isn't it? You can't feed from an empty bowl, so you have to be a little bit selfish to be generous.
Yeah.
So there has to be a balance in your boundaries as well. That's what boundaries are. It's where you're actually still happy to be generous, or happy to be with somebody, or give something. Generosity, really, I suppose, is the word.
And that's sort of the point I was getting onto, which is you have to know yourself to be able to set them. And that's the hard part. Do you know what I mean? That's the difficult part that people, as we're brought up and as we go through life. So for me, I suppose, just to take a personal example, there was a lot of having to say yes, because I was expected to say yes, and if I didn't say yes, then I was either being disrespectful or I wasn't showing love for somebody or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? So people pleasing sort of comes into it a little bit, I suppose, maybe. Do you know? And what happens is that the more and more that you do that, the less aware of yourself you are, because you don't hold yourself in any esteem of being deserving of some of the stuff that we need to when we're setting the boundaries. Do you know what I mean?
So I'm trying to think of maybe it might be helpful to kind of think of examples in our own lives where we're not using boundaries effectively and where they're causing anxiety and stress. So this is a subject that I'm terrible at anyway. It goes into the assertiveness and the difficult conversations. I shouldn't even be on the panel for these two discussions. And what I've found is just by kind of going through a few of the videos and a few of the articles that relate to this topic, that a couple of things that I'm doing wrong. One of them is getting anxious when somebody asks for something and feeling like I should say yes. And you just touched on that there as well, Jimmy. And I'm you know better than anybody that I'm terrible for saying no, and then ending up in a very, very stressed position doing something that either I don't want to be doing or I don't have the ability or the time to complete. And then I end up kind of getting stressed and anxious about that, and it's already too late because I've already agreed to do it.
Yeah.
And then part of me then, the other part of it is we said a pride, and I said I'm going to do it now. It's my bed, I lie in it. But like, that's grand if it's only one project, like, but if it's stacked and stacked and stacked,
And it becomes a habit.
It's a horrible habit.
But that's why it becomes, because that's what you've always done. Do you know what I mean? And like, do you know, when you said that you shouldn't be on the podcast with us, I think, why not? Because you have this life experience and you're learning from it all the time. And we're in the same boat. I can bring you back to a time when I was in school and say people were, I suppose, bullying or slagging or taking the piss or whatever. And I allowed it to happen. And then to try and sort of fall in with the gang would laugh at it too. But then for many years, that actually affected me, because I sort of took on board whatever they were saying to me as being, well, that's how people see me. Do you know what I mean? Until you decide to then, I don't think I actually consciously went, I need to set a boundary. I just lost the head, like. Do you know what I mean? I went a bit mental. Well,
you're very good at saying no.
Only in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, but you just say, you know, I often
just when you met Mar.
No, I said yes for quite a while when I met Mar.
No, he doesn't. He says no all the time. What he does is, you say to him, do you know what I was thinking of doing? And I was thinking of moving that wardrobe over to the side and blah, 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 and all that. And he'd say, no. And I'd say, why? He'd say, what are you asking me? So he says no without even...
That's not listening. That's just not listening. There's nothing about saying no. But I was bad at... I always said yes. Do you know, when you first met me, yes, I always said yes to everybody, didn't I?
Yep.
Yeah. See? And I don't anymore. I say no now, and I don't make any apologies for saying no. Do you know what I mean?
The foot down.
No,
the foot is going down.
except with the kids, I still do with the kids. They go, can I have? And I go, no.
Know, yeah.
And then about an hour later, I go, what was that you wanted? Come on, we go and get it.
No, he could have an argument on the phone and say, no, I'm not going to the garage. I'm not going to the garage. And then he's still arguing, and you're driving into the garage. Why? Like, but that's him. He does say no all the time.
That's for another podcast. How to say no and mean it and keep to it.
Do you know what I find kind of hard about boundaries is that sometimes, you know, the way when you're kind of happy to give people things, and you know it's grand, and then they step over that boundary. And sometimes what kind of gets me is that I don't really want to set the boundary, but I kind of feel, here am I now having to argue or having to be upset, or they're having to be upset, that I have to explain to them that they've stepped over the line. And that is something that really is where I find I get anxious and upset, because, you know, it's kind of a thing that, you know, no matter how good you are, if you don't have that boundary, then all your good has gone out the door.
But I think that, you know, I've watched you and Liam when you've been teaching the kids and stuff, And the way you explain it to the kids that I've seen a couple of times is where you say, this is all right, and this is not all right.
Yeah.
And this is why this is not all right. Do you know what I mean? Well, it's no different for us as adults. Now, obviously, you're not going to say that to an adult in that way. But what I mean is, if you don't set your boundaries clearly with somebody, that's where you have the problem. Because once somebody steps over the boundaries, then there should be no need. There should be consequences, you say, and the consequence is whatever you decided the consequence is, rather than you having to follow into that, overstepping and going into, say, the anxiety of having an argument or having to explain yourself or whatever the case may be. So it's having the boundaries set clear. And, you know, Liam was talking about it or mentioned it a few minutes ago. We've covered quite a few. This is episode 26, isn't it, or something like that?
Yeah.
So we've covered a few other episodes and podcasts which cover things that are important that you need to have to facilitate setting your boundaries. But I suppose the first thing is maybe asking ourselves, why do we need to set them? Why do we need to have boundaries?
Well, it's more kind of the reason being that you have to respect your own self-worth. Because if you don't have the boundaries and somebody takes you for advantage or asks for too much or doesn't thank you or doesn't appreciate you, it may be that they just didn't realize that was the way to behave, or that was expected or was appreciated. And if you didn't do that for yourself initially, then you can't blame anybody for taking advantage of you afterwards, you know. So it like having the knowledge that you need to set boundaries and having the confidence to set the boundaries means that you are more aware of your own worth.
Yeah.
And if you're aware of your own worth, then you're more self-confident because you know you're worth something. Whereas if you don't really kind of think you're worth anything and you don't set any boundaries and that people walk all over you and not appreciate you for this or that and the other, and you know your ideas are never taken on board, well then partially that's down to that's your own fault. Partially.
That's set boundaries, yeah. What would you say?
Well, I would say that it's hard to set boundaries because life changes all the time, and you kind of, you know, I found, we'll say, in my journey that I've ended up.
That word, don't you?
Yeah, I've ended up. I've come to places that I've ended up in a kind of a situation due to maybe not knowing I was going to be there. Or does that make sense? Like, you know, if you could start with a blank page now and say, okay, I'm going to set my boundaries. Me at this age and my experience, I now know some of those boundaries, and I'm still going to make mistakes. But there are I have learned by experience. We'll say learned the hard way. I now know what upsets me. Don't know everything that upsets me, but there's certain things that have upset me, and that's where then you figure out where that boundary is, and then you have to try and make sure that doesn't happen the next time, you know, and it really is life experience.
So if you were saying to somebody, you need to set boundaries because, what would you say? So why do you need to set them?
You need to set boundaries so that you're happy. That you're actually in a place where you're not anxious, you're happy that to give what you've decided what is okay to give, so that you have something for yourself. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to be, you know, it's important because you need a little bit of preservation for yourself, and a little bit of the, you know, so you don't get upset. And that upset and anxiety is overwhelmed, maybe because you've got too much on your plate, like Liam said, or that somebody has just upset you so much and they don't even understand it. Yeah. So if you don't know where that line is, then how is the other person supposed to know? So it's really important to know yourself and set that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd probably be on the same page of what both of you are, which is, you know, we need to set boundaries because people take advantage. We need to set boundaries because when people step over what's okay, not okay to you as an individual, you are affected mentally and emotionally in some way, generally in a negative way, and that can compound itself and get deeper and deeper and deeper if you keep allowing it to happen and happen and happen. And then the other problem is that sometimes you can cut people off at the knees because you've just had enough of all of these people doing it, and then that reaction is also affecting you mentally as well and physically in a negative way, because now you're probably giving out yourself that shoulda, coulda, woulda, or whatever that type of scenario is. Do you know what I mean? So you're backtracking and you're trying to, maybe you're apologising because you said something the way you said it, or you did something in the way you did it, or whatever. Whereas if you had the boundary set clearly to say this is what's okay and this is what's not okay and why it's not okay, do you know what I mean? It means that life will become a little bit easier, but it is about knowing yourself. That's probably stage number one.
But I'm just wondering, just in terms of like, how is this managed in a professional workplace? And it's done like we do it here. There are contracts, there are employment contracts, and somebody's roles, responsibilities, their rights, their roster, all of that stuff is laid out. And we know from experience that if we don't do a contract and if we don't explain things up front, that somebody is going to make a mistake at some point in time, and then we have to go through the reprimanding phase, and then, you know, you feel bad about giving out to somebody, but if you didn't tell them in the first place, then how were they to know? And like, this comes down to small minute things, and one of them, so I just know somebody who wasn't really that great at setting boundaries, and one of the consequences all of the time when one of our group stepped over a line with this one person was, we say like, but I didn't know that was going to upset you. Well, you should have known.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
How the fuck was I supposed to? You know what I mean? Like, you're expecting somebody to be a mind reader. So we deal with that in the workplace, as I say, with contracts, and then other boundaries that we don't even think that we've set. So let's say a secondary school or a primary school child, if you ask them, can you cut the grass at 10 a.m. on Monday morning? They're going to say, no, I have school. So without even thinking about it, that's a clear boundary. Do you know? Now, we think to make up boundaries around work and school and around things that we're obligated to do. But setting that, like we say, you could also say, right, can you do it on 10 o'clock on a Saturday? No, Saturday morning is my time to meditate. Now, I don't know what fucking child is going to say that, but it's just somebody
should do.
Yeah, they should do, yeah. But it's the idea is that you can, like, that's the equivalent of setting a boundary that's good for you, that hasn't been imposed by your school principal or your parents. It's just one that you set for you, and it's for your own mental health, as opposed to one that was set by society. School is between Monday and Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. or whatever the time is, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to come up with examples of how we can set boundaries in our own life.
In one way, I suppose the work and the school and stuff like that, they'd probably be classified in sort of the realms of an auditory manner in regards to it, do as I say. This just do it. Do you know what I mean? Whereas when we're talking about personal boundaries, they're a little bit more difficult because there's generally other people involved, because we're talking about physical boundaries and emotional boundaries, personal boundaries. So there is other people involved. So for example, can I think of one now?
I'm just thinking there, having a contract every time you meet someone. You could be my friend if you had this contract.
But there are contracts. There are prenuptial marriage agreements. That's an example of clear boundaries. What I have is my own, and whatever you make is mine as well.
I don't know whether they're clear.
Well, they're designed to be clear. Like, you know, any sort of contract is designed is an example of a boundary.
But it's in a different scenario. Do you know what I mean? It's coming from a different place. And then again, when you go back and say one of the studies that Google did, in how to have a productive team with a good sense of work and connection and community, what people want is what's called the physical safety, which is and psychological safety, which is they want to be heard. Yeah, so sometimes they need to step over that boundary because they want to be listened to. They want to be their input to be listened to and talked about, and not just saying, "Look, no, this is the way we're doing it. That's it. Your idea is stupid." Or don't give me your idea, I'm not interested. Do you know what I mean? And from a psychological safety, that they don't have that fear that if they step over that boundary, which is in maybe the contract or whatever, that they're going to get sacked. Or now they're on the hatchet list, which is eventually going to lead them to get sacked. Do you know what I mean? Whereas, if you have, say, let's say, for instance, I was watching a podcast on this particular thing, the lady's called Julia Christina. I think you introduced her on one of the podcasts ages ago.
Yep.
And she was talking about where she went back to work having a baby.
Yep.
And she asked her parents to mind the baby. And she sort of had said that I need to leave the house at 10 o'clock. So because I walk to work and I'll get into work on time. And so that was sort of the boundary. Yeah. Her parents were never on time. They were always somewhere between 5 and 50 minutes late. So after a couple of weeks of doing this, that wasn't working for her. So she sort of said, okay, what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to walk to work with the baby in the pram. So when you're on your way, just ring me and meet up with me and I'll give you the baby because I need to leave the house at 10 o'clock. And the way she explains it is that that's what she needed. So that was her boundary, so that she was going to be in work on time. She wasn't giving out to the parents to say, you're always late. Do you know what I mean? She wasn't creating an argument. She was sort of saying to them, this is what I need to do, and this is what you need to do if you want to help me do what I'm doing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what they did for 2 or 3 trips, and then the parents were on time all the time. But there was no argument, there was no discussion, there was no threatening of, if you're not at my house at 10 o'clock, you can't have the baby and I'm going to get a babysitter and all that, this scenario. So that's how she did the boundaries. So she was concerned about how was it for her, so what did she need?
Yeah.
And she had to come up with a boundary that, thinking about the other people involved and understanding that, look, they have a life as well.
Yeah.
So I don't want to argue with them or piss them off. I just need to tell them how it is.
Yeah.
But there was no animosity. So she was sort of taking into consideration compassion and empathy and understanding for the other people, but she still was able to set a boundary, whereas we're not good at that.
But I think it's everybody is happy if the boundaries are there. Do you know what I mean? If it's, I suppose it's about being assertive and kind of thinking, not today. If you're asked to do something and it goes beyond what you need, that the boundary, it's okay to kind of say, no, actually, I can't. Not today, or I don't want to, or I don't have time. And it's properly just being honest about the actual feeling at that time. And that's a boundary enough if you can be that assertive to say it, because I'm not sure. I mean, it's very hard for somebody to set all the boundaries without actually having the experience, because sometimes you don't know where that line is yourself. I mean, it's great that she knew that, we'll say 10 o'clock was her time to leave, and that was a very clear boundary that that she needed to do. But, sometimes there's a little bit of, we'll say, if, for argument's sake, her parents now said, they'd mind the baby child, no bother, but then maybe next Thursday it doesn't suit me. That it's, is there a boundary then to say, okay, that's a boundary too, that you can kind of say, okay, that's fair enough. And but if they left it and didn't say it, and they wanted the Thursday not to do it, then that's where it becomes a mishmash, and then that becomes a problem.
But that's because the boundary wasn't set.
Yeah, but that's what I'm talking about, is that the boundary, it's not even like, I suppose boundary for me is not just the line. There's actually a point that you can actually be honest and say, I do it all the time, but now I can't do it now. And that's not actually a line. That's actually a place, a boundary where you have set that they don't have the expectation that you're there all the time.
Well, like psychologically, the boundary is there is a line.
Yeah. Okay.
That is it. What it doesn't mean is that you don't. When you're setting a boundary, it's not about being, controlling, manipulative, aggressive, auditory. It is like you're saying. It is being honest. And when we're talking about setting a boundary, it's not about changing anybody else. So it's there's nobody else is involved in this except you. This is what you need, and you know what you need and why you need it. And it's generally about your mental health or your emotional well-being or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? So it's changing what you need for you.
And it's okay to reevaluate that every
Absolutely,
so often. Is probably what I was trying to say in a long-winded way. But it's about that like your boundary can change.
Yeah.
For certain times because you reevaluate that you tried that and it didn't work, and that you can come back and renegotiate where the boundary is.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's what you need there, and it's what you need right now. Do you know what I mean? Which again is what Liam is saying about being self-aware. And again, it comes into the realms of controllables and non-controllables. So what you have control of is only you and what you need, and you have no control on anybody else. Or any other situation. So to have the boundary set, at least you know how. So this isn't about. It's not about pushing. When we're talking about boundaries, it's not about pushing people's buttons. It's just knowing. It's making life a little bit easier for you, so that some of the stresses and worries that we have in regards to other people, and like you said, what the expectation is, that's sort of not there anymore. That they know who you are, what you need, and where your boundaries are. I know the word boundaries can seem very like prison. Do you know what I mean? And
that's probably what I was thinking.
The word isn't a great word probably, but what it means is that emotionally, physically, and mentally, you're okay with once people know where they stand with you. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, if you lend out something to your neighbour and every time they return it's broken, you're going to stop lending them the stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Well, you should, if you have respect for yourself.
Exactly, yeah.
Do you know what I found interesting when I was kind of getting ready for this podcast was how people set their boundaries. People, the symptoms of it, are the way. Do you know what I mean? People can set boundaries by being standoffish. Can be ones with the chip on their shoulder. Do you know that? Or can be very assertive. There's different ways that people actually.
Sometimes somebody just gets odd, and you know that you're after stepping over the line.
Exactly, yeah.
So that would be a passive aggressive way of setting your boundaries. That would be like somebody that didn't set their boundaries. You went over the line, and now they're odd with you, but it was their fault that they didn't set the boundaries, or it was combined fault. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about. That's not the way to set boundaries.
Yeah.
Because that's the way you're going to piss people off.
Yeah, but I know, but the way some people are not strong enough to set boundaries, so they might be a bit standoffish, that they kind of feel, okay, if I step in here now, I don't know how much I want to give or how much, whatever, I want to get involved here, and so they can be a bit standoffish.
So what does that do to them?
Well, what it does, it makes them, but it isolates them because they can't get, kind of go in there and do things. But it's just that it's their way of doing it, and I think that, we're all, boundaries, like, I don't think there's anybody perfect at doing it. I think that you could be perfect with one situation and then be totally awful in another situation. So it's not one fix for all. You have
Absolutely.
different ways of managing.
It's definitely a learning experience.
Boundaries, yeah.
But I think, if you think about when you're talking about that person that's standoffish and you went into the thoughts that they're going to have, so effectively you're creating an anxiousness inside yourself, exactly what you said you do. Do you know what I mean? So therefore, by not setting boundaries, you're actually affecting yourself in how you feel mentally.
I thought lockdown was a great way, for me anyway, it was a great way of reasserting the boundaries. Do you know, the way that, like, certain things you kind of like got a chance to stop. Okay, what is it I don't like? And, you know, so I limit lockdown every so often. Might be that. But not now every couple of weeks, lads. But maybe once, maybe every 2 or 3 years, like that they had a little bit, maybe a 2-week break just to kind of just sit back and kind of reevaluate what's bothering you and then kind of come back and then it's not, that's what was great, you know, when we reopened the gym, we changed the timetable because you're kind of trying to take in so many factors when you we had this chance to stop and say, okay, what suits us? And there were our boundaries, and it worked really, really well. And, you know, so that for me, it was a great kind of learning curve to kind of say, actually, at some point, it's okay just to kind of say, okay, for this to function, we need to stop. We need to reassert ourselves and then move forward. And everybody was happy to move with what we did. And that was what people knew where they stood or knew what way it was going to go. And everybody was happy. You know, like not that everything was perfect since lockdown, but you know what I mean? There were certain things and, you know, little boxes you could tick off over the time. And it's kind of a little bit of that. And it's sometimes you kind of have to think again yourself, like, okay, restart every so often. Just kind of take a little step back. Think about what's making me anxious, what's not working, and how can I fix that? So that's where, so for the boundaries, kind of talking about one, you know, just kind of pausing all these TVs, and then sorting out each TV, each situation as we go.
Yeah, I hear you. So it's stop, pause, be calm, evaluate, and make a decision or a choice.
Yeah.
But you don't need to go into lockdown to do that. That's what mindfulness is about.
No. Well, it took me to lockdown.
So you can do it every day.
Some of them. Yeah, but I know, but I think that, I suppose what I was saying is that lockdown, yeah, that's what lockdown taught me. That it's not that I need lockdown, but lockdown can be a holiday. It can be a meditation. It can be, that stop. And that's what lockdown was. It was, we had no choice. That was it. Where we do have a choice to meditate. We have a choice to go on holidays. But for the first time, I suppose, we were given no choice.
Yeah.
And that was a good learning one for boundaries for me.
But I think that, like, even, say, with some of the stuff that we've done at home and in the house and stuff like that, we've actually done that at certain times when we wanted to make a decision or we want to come up with something. We use the benefit of that where, say, with the paint in the bedroom or whatever, we come up with an idea, we come up with a colour or a plan, we stopped, we evaluated. Do you know what I mean? There was no stress, there was no anxiousness, and then we just got it done when we were ready to get it done. Do you know what I mean? So definitely that's what I suppose when the initial lockdown came in, that's what everybody took from it. Now it's gone a little bit on too far. But that's how you can set boundaries, using that process.
Yeah.
So what were those steps again there? The 5 steps that you called out. You said stop, pause, whatever.
Stop, pause.
Is that not the same thing?
Breathe.
Is there a difference between stop and
Evaluate.
pause?
I can't remember what I said. Rewind the tape there and see what I said. I can't remember. I wasn't paying attention. But look, here's one. So I've had a few clients when I was doing the research for the program. I have a few clients who have, this is the statement they say, okay, constantly to me. I've done exactly as a good little girl or a good little boy should do. That's their statement. And now they're coming to me with a challenge of some description, usually around anxiety or fear or depression or whatever. Do you think they've boundaries put in place?
No, they're living on expectations of somebody else.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Sounds like they're living on someone else's boundaries.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And then when we're talking about what is it that we need to sort of work on boundaries and setting them in certain places, we're talking about what you said earlier on, which is difficult conversations. We're talking about self-awareness. Mindfulness is involved there. We're talking about emotional intelligence, which is to do with understanding your feelings and your emotions. We're talking about understanding your triggers and your reactions. We're talking about using empathy, compassion. And the end goal of it is that Do you remember we had an episode on happiness? What is happiness? Well, the end goal is when we use all these tools and put them together in some way, shape, or form. And I'm not talking about changing your whole life in like an hour, but as you progress using all of these tools, which we've covered before, and I'm sure we'll cover it in more detail again, it helps life become just that little bit easier. And then you can go into realms of what is happiness for you, or are you happier, or whatever the case may be. Do you know what I mean?
I suppose it's definitely going to be a little bit happier if you have less anxiety and less stress.
Absolutely, yeah.
And if you have your boundaries set, you know how much time you have to give somebody. You know how much, of yourself, time, emotion, financial, whatever it is, and it's kind of having, I suppose, it's having a, like you said, self-worth, because like you have to, and you said it as well earlier, Liam, you have to put a value on yourself. And then when you put a value on yourself, then you're going into a contract with whatever friendship, whatever business, whatever, with knowing what you bring to the table. And and what you're willing to bring to the table. As time, as relationships or anything develop, you might reassess that and bring more to the table. But that's where it is with it. You don't go and, like, I suppose even at the moment, like we're talking about, kids now are growing up with social media, so there aren't any boundaries as to what people know about them. So like there's no it's like going, or like, kind of as if they have their CV, their curriculum vitae up there for everybody to read all the time. So like they should have that kind of, like kind of having that that boundary where you get to know people and you give according to what you're being given back, instead of just handing it all out there. Imagine going into I suppose into school and handing them up a year's homework on the first day. What happens? You get another year's homework to do on top of it, because you just laid it all out there. And then, so those boundaries are really important to kind of, can start at a certain place and then increase the...
Yeah, I think with social media, there's a couple of things on it, and one of them would be is that what you see isn't always the truth. Is one issue. The second thing is that people can push their boundaries on social media because, what is it, we call them keyboard warriors or whatever it is, do you know what I mean? So they feel it's okay to say anything about anybody. There's also the issue of facts and fiction and fake news or whatever, do you know what I mean? So there's lots of other more difficult things regarding social media, but you're right, you are putting yourself out there for everybody to see, with no boundaries. Do you know?
And that, and that's a place where we don't really, maybe we don't focus enough on teaching people or even ourselves, considering that we need to have boundaries on our social media side as well, which is how much we want out there for criticism or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm thinking maybe we could possibly challenge our listeners and our viewers to come up with something over the next couple of days that, on reflection after listening to this episode, that they may kind of have realized that actually this is something that's causing me stress, is something that's causing me anxiety, and reassess whether they have set the boundaries adequately or whether they have left boundaries lapse or never set them in the first place, and maybe take it as a challenge over the next 7 days to reset boundaries and have one or two little difficult conversations, and kind of get back to a space where whatever situation that is not causing stress anymore. So I wonder, is that a good challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. It is. Yeah, it is. It's a good challenge, and I suppose when you're looking at boundaries, it's about just having that question in your mind: what's okay for me, and what's not.
Yeah,
that's probably a simple way of.
And like I said earlier, it's really about if you're going to help somebody, you can't help from an empty. You can't feed from an empty bowl. So boundaries are very important for you to help others as well. Because, when you talk about even, going into to work with the homeless, if you don't set that boundary, then you're not, like me, I'd be emotional wreck in there. So you have to be, set what boundaries you can be helpful at. And I think that'd be a great challenge, because I don't think there's anybody, maybe somebody will tell us that they have all their boundaries set and they didn't have anyone's to change, but I doubt.
No, I don't think the Dalai Lama is listening to us.
So everybody has something, and it can be very small or it can be a large one, but like I think even a small one is going to make such a difference in your life.
Absolutely, and I think, exactly going back on what you said earlier on, which is there is nobody is perfect at this. You know what I mean?
No.
You're going to make mistakes, but the worst thing you can possibly do is not have them.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing you could possibly do, is not have any boundaries, because that is when, people will take advantage of you. It's when you will be totally full of anxiety or stress or worry, what ifs, expectation, all of those things. And it's just not a good place to be. Whereas if you begin to set one and just begin with one, even identifying one that you need to set, that's a step in the right direction. Do you know what I mean?
But I think it's actually it's your duty to help the other person also who's involved in it, because when we're doing that class, what you keep telling the teens out in the school, if somebody had mayonnaise all over their face like that, you need to tell that person they've mayonnaise over their face. So isn't this the same thing, like that? If somebody is stepping, you need to be able to say that that's not cool. And it's all right to tell them that's not cool, because they may not have understood that's not cool. And then you're helping them as well. Because if we didn't have boundaries, we'll say if you're a parent and you don't have boundaries set for your kids, what kind of kids are you going to rear? It's not going to be good for them. So, I mean, that's the same as everybody else. I mean, people have more respect for people who set boundaries. And I think that it's actually beneficial on a two-way street.
Well, you'll definitely be in a better place and be able to help, if that's the word, or support other people in different ways, and have the energy to do it and have the motivation to do it and be in the right place to do it,
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to what you were saying earlier on, Liam, which is, if you don't tell somebody, then they're not aware of it,
Yeah.
and look, it's okay if somebody steps over it because they're not aware, and you can make them aware. Do you know what I mean?
I suppose it's
okay
not
too.
a case of like, I set the boundaries and they stepped over. It can actually be a case of, I didn't know that actually was going to be a problem for me.
Yeah,
And,
exactly.
so actually, now that's on
Now
my
I
list.
need to put in something. Yeah.
So just as a kind of a starting point as well, this kind of feeds into the Difficult Conversations podcast that we did a few shows back. And let's say somebody hasn't set a boundary or let a boundary lapse, and now they have to go and readjust. Well, then that's going to be, in some cases, that's going to be a difficult conversation. So just something that popped into my head is the icebreader, the start to that conversation. So whoever it is that this relationship is with, you say, I need to talk to you. This is not working for me. Right, and then as a starting point, there you go. You can't fucking turn back now, so you better finish your sentences now. But you got the conversation going, and now even if you can't elaborate or clarify or explain your boundaries adequately, at least the other person is aware now that there is an issue, and then together you can come to the boundary together. So I need to talk to you. This is not working for me. I think that's a good icebreaker to start the conversation on that particular topic. But with that, do we have enough to do our top tips of the day?
We do. Before we go to the top tips, I've put a couple of books in the show notes on the FCPGM page.
You're only reading it off the screen now.
I can't see with my glasses. It's all blurred. Everything is blurred out there. And we had some of these books in before. So one of the books is Difficult Conversations, which you just talked about, which helps you to set up difficult conversations and manage them. Another one was Emotional Intelligence, which is a book by Daniel Goleman, which is about self-awareness. And I came across another one when I was doing research, and the title of the book is called But It's Your Family. And this is written by Dr. Sherry Campbell, and it's talking about family boundaries, because when I was doing my research and from my experience and work experience, families can be the difficult part of setting boundaries for various different reasons, which probably is a whole other podcast. But this book looks quite, I haven't read it, but I've read the synopsis of it and stuff, and it looks very interesting and very good. And she makes up some good points in some of the stuff that we've covered. And there's some YouTube stuff in there from that. Julia Christina, which is very good on boundaries in her podcast. She's another, she's a master's in counselling and therapy and stuff, so they're worth checking out. So, top tips.
Well, I'm going to, if you're going to mention the books, I'm going to tell you that any of Brene Brown's books, I would highly recommend them. I love Daring Greatly, and we've had them on the show notes all the time. And she does great topics on setting boundaries. It's about being brave enough to set the boundaries.
I've actually put in, she's got a YouTube on it, because she did her own podcast on boundaries as well, and I've put a little clip. It's a 6-minute clip in there from Brene Brown. She's amazing. And do you know, Liam always says it, so I'll just give him a break this week, and I'll say is the affiliate links to the books are in the show notes, and they help us keep the podcast going. So we'd highly recommend, if you're going to buy any of the books and you're interested, if you use the affiliation notes that we've put in there, and the links for you in there in the show notes. So, tips.
Right. So who wants to go first?
Well, I think Jimmy should go first there. James.
Okay. So, tip number 1 is self-awareness. So, when we're talking about being self-aware, we're talking about what are the boundaries that you feel that you need to build, why do you need them, and where do you need them, maybe from an emotional sense, or emotionally, what is the reason that you need them. So being aware of what you need and why you need them, so what's okay with you and what's not okay, being aware of that. Number 2.
So I'll take number 2, because I don't know what number 3 is. So so number 2 is listening to your feelings, and just take the signals that your body is giving you. We talk about this literally every single week. Emotions, stress, anxiety, all of those things are literally just signals that your body is giving you. And they're signals to tell you that something needs to change. If you're stressed or anxious about something, and you're feeling that kind of tightness in your chest, or your stomach is upside down, or you can't sleep, well, then something is trying to tell you something, and take it as a signal and use it to be able to assess. Maybe there are some boundaries there that I've left lapse, or that don't suit me, and I'm anxious because of that reason, and therefore then take action based on that. So just overall, just listen to your emotions, because they're the signals that are telling you something is up. Mara, what's number 3?
Number 3 is self-compassion, and be kind to yourself. And this is really important, because, you know, when you're setting boundaries, it's for your own self, for your own mental health, because when you don't have those boundaries, then you're not in a good place. So it's about being kind of looking at yourself and being very kind, and, you know, looking at what you need again, and then you're going to be good to help everybody else. So, you know, if something is getting you down, don't be too hard on yourself, thinking that you're going to upset somebody. Just say, look, I need to do this for me. Be compassionate for yourself.
Tip number 4 then is build up your assertiveness skills, taking into consideration now compassion and empathy for yourself and others. So this doesn't mean that you need to buy a big stick and get a teacher's hat on and start telling people as it is, but it's about being able to communicate in a correct way to those people around you or who you need to set your boundaries with, assertively and comfortably for yourself, so that even after you set them, that you're okay.
Okay, I suppose I'll do number. Is that number 4?
Number
Number
5.
5.
So, number 5 was to start small and take one thing at a time. So, just like anything else that we do, it's a skill that you're going to have to practice. You're going to have to get good at it and take. And we have our challenge this week now, which we did just before the tips started. That we're challenging our listeners and our viewers to go ahead and maybe assess from your own point of view, is there something where your boundaries have already lapsed? So that would be a good starting point. And then once you have one done, then you're a little bit better. You can do it again and just rinse and repeat until you have no more stress in your life. And you'll probably never get to that point, but
You get close to it.
you get close enough. So start small, take it one at a time. So just to recap on the 5 tips again. So number 1, make sure you have self-awareness and know why you need boundaries. Number 2, listen to your feelings, listen to your gut. Number 3, have self-compassion and be kind to yourself. Number 4, build your assertiveness skills. And number 5, start small, take it one at a time. Now, with all of that done and tips delivered, I think, Mar, do you have a quote of the week?
Yeah, my quote of the week is from the great Brene Brown, because I really do think that she's got a great handle on all of this. She does, and I would really recommend people to read her books or listen to her podcast, because she's really, really good.
We'll have to get her on as a guest one
I
of
know,
these
I
days.
Yeah,
would
definitely, yeah.
absolutely love it, because she's very entertaining and she's got her shit together. Like,
If
Yeah.
anybody has an inside scoop on her or an email address for her or a contact for her, let us know and we'll try and make that happen.
exactly, yeah. So a great quote that she has that I'm going to use today is, daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others.
So I suppose that is the kind of the nubs of it. Really, it's we do have to go ahead and set these boundaries, knowing full well that sometimes it's going to put somebody's nose out of joint. But
And just remember, it's not them.
it's not them. Yep, it's more important that you're not working yourself into an anxiety tizzy by not saying so. So you want to say that one more time, Summer?
Okie dokes. So, daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others.
Okay, so I think that's it. As always, guys, make sure that you check out the show notes on www.fcpgm.com. All links to videos, articles, books, everything that we talked about during the show. And for every other show that we've done up to this point, we're on number 26 now. They're all there. So go check them out. And so we'll go around the table. So, Jimmy, where are people going to find you?
So you can find me on www.apiclinics.com.
Mar?
I'm on all the social media platforms as Marlene Griffin SPG, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. But the best place to find me is at the reception of SPG. There, I'm always hanging out there, and I love an old chat and a cuppa. So call in sometime and see me.
Right, you'll find me at Liam OG Griffin on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and as I said, www.fcpgm.com for the podcast. And I think that's it. Have you anything else? Have we any announcements or?
No,
We're good.
no,
We're good.
All good.
Okay. All right. Go and comment away there and let us know when you're after doing that challenge. And we expect you to be totally zen the next time we see you. So until next week, guys. Hold on. Bear with me. Too many freaking buttons. Until next week, this has been the fight coach, the psychotherapist, and the gym mama.